Cultural les da la bienvenida al auditorio de Surco. Siguiendo las recomendaciones de INDECI, les pedimos que ubiquen la puerta de salida más cercana a su asiento, laterales y posteriores. De ocurrir una emergencia, mantengan la calma. Nuestro personal estará para guiarlos. Les recordamos que está prohibido consumir alimentos y bebidas, así como tomar fotografías o realizar grabaciones de audio o video. Les pedimos por favor que se tomen unos segundos para apagar sus celulares. Así no molestaremos a los artistas ni a las demás personas asistentes. Muchas gracias. Disfruten de la función.
Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. So today we are here with David Seidler, the dramatic writer, of course, of The King's Speech. So I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for coming. Special thank you to everyone who's joining us on Britannico Live. Thank you. We hope you enjoy today's session, and we hope you ask any questions at all that you would like to ask David. Please feel free to ask anything at all. So I'd like to ask now David to tell us a little bit about yourself, about your career, and then we'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
I think mainly questions, because I'm sure that's going to give you more of what you came to hear. Is there any way of lowering those lights? Because I can't see you. There's just this black, you can see me, but I can't see you, and that's not fair. Is there any way of doing it?
I'm sure they're
if they could.
looking to do it.
It's also very blinding.
We're a little blinded, yes.
Well, I will start by apologizing. One, for not being able to speak your very exciting, expressive language. I'm not a linguist. I can barely speak English, as you can tell. My father was fluent in 8 languages, including Russian and Chinese. and I did not inherit that talent at all, so I sometimes doubted whether he really was my father. But yeah, he probably was. So the other thing I have to apologize for, this is embarrassing. I assumed when I was asked to speak to a group of Peruvian students that they would be film students. So I had prepared a little talk that was aimed directly at film students. And you're not. You're students of English. Some of you may be film students, but certainly not all. If I could actually see you, I'd ask you to raise your hands and tell me, oh, I can see you a little bit now. That's better.
Yeah.
I'll just do the whole thing like this. How many out there of you are film students? Exactly none. So it's very good that I've decided not to give the speech that I prepared because it would be totally inappropriate. What you are all students of the English language. Really, I'd love to be able to see them better than I can. Is it possible to dim that light or bring up the house lights?
See you.
That's a bit better. Thank you very, very much. What a lovely group. Terrific. Thank you very much for taking time out of a glorious day to come and see me. I'm not sure why you did that. That's very foolish of you. The English language, as you're probably discovering, is quite majestic. It can do almost everything, and it does it usually in a very stately style. There are things about the English language that are confusing. We have words that have maybe 4 or 5 different meanings, which is very confusing, but normally it's a logical and majestic language. You know, it says things like to be or not to be, you know, it's good stuff. And I earn my living working in the English language. So I would like to start by just giving you some generalities that have nothing to do with what you really came to hear. We'll talk about the King's Speech later. You can ask any questions you want, and I'll answer honestly and forthrightly, except I will not give you Colin Firth's phone number. All you girls, you can't ask that question. One of the things that I have learned in writing stemmed from an interesting conversation I had early on with Francis Coppola, the director of the Godfather movies and many other movies. And he told me something that stuck with me for a long time. He said, you need to know where you're going before you begin. In other words, before you start on a journey, know your destination. And I have found that probably the single most best advice I've ever had in terms of writing. He went on quite specifically to say, you really should know your big final scene. It may not be the actual last scene of the movie, but it's the big movie moment at the end. That's what you're going for. And so when you start on the journey, you have, I've forgotten what term he used, but I've later called it the thin red line. So here's your start, there's your destination, that's the thin red line. Anything that moves that line forward, you keep. Anything, no matter how beautifully written, that doesn't move that line forward, you have to cut. As a writer, you have to murder some of your children. It's very sad, but we do it all the time. And I have found, excuse me, I'm a little dehydrated from a plane trip. I'm also very sleepy. If I snore, forgive me. I didn't get to bed until 3 this morning, and I was up at 8, and, you know, I need my beauty sleep. Cheers. I found that this also applies to life. And so let me pontificate just briefly on this point, because you are all students, and so it's fertile ground to throw these seeds. You're about to embark upon a journey, and it really behooves you to have some idea of where you want for your destination. Right? Give it some thought. I really encourage you to give this considerable thought. It doesn't have to be in detail. I want to be president of Peru by the time I'm 32, and you're terribly disappointed when you only become president at 38. I'm not talking about those kind of details, but what is it that you want? Do you want just money? Well, it's quite a reasonable ambition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get happiness, because we know that some of the richest people in the world are some of the most unhappy people in the world. Although being really poor isn't much fun either. What are your goals? Is it love? Is it family? Is it achievement? And then when you know what you're aiming for, you've got a thin red line. And anything that moves you forward to that goal, keep going. And anything that you find is taking you on a detour, get back on the thin red line. That's a piece of advice that comes from working with the language that you are studying. All right? People ask me how I write. They should ask really why I write. I'm a storyteller. As some of you may know, I was also a profound stutterer as a child. I couldn't tell stories. And of course, I was quite a ham bone as a kid. I wanted to tell all my friends' stories, and I couldn't do it. So I then found that the only way I could tell stories was to write them. And that's how I started on that journey. How do I write? I only choose projects that speak to me personally. There are many, many projects that are brought to me that are wonderful stories, really interesting. And I say, yeah, it's terrific, and it'll make a wonderful movie, and I'd love to go and see it, but I'm not going to write it. It's not for me. It doesn't speak to me as a person. And then my agents will sometimes present me with something, and they'll say, yeah, David, we know you're not going to want to do this. This is not up your alley, but legally we have to present anything that's offered to you. So here's this story. We'll just pass. I'll say, no. There's something in there that I know I want to write about, something that I can talk about with some authority, because it's deep inside me and it wants to come out. And that's how I make my choices. Okay? The technical aspect of how I write is usually pretty straightforward. I'm quite old-fashioned and classical in that. I start taking notes. If it's a research project, of course, I'm taking notes from all my reading. But even if it's not based on a true story or an actual story, I will do a lot of thinking about it and start taking notes. And I'll usually end up with a pile of 3x5 cards about that high. And if possible, I work in a room with a large cork board, and I start pinning up these note cards, right? And yeah, this is something that'll probably go near the beginning, so I put it in that part of the cork board. And, yeah, this will be at the end, and this here, and then no, these should go here, and I'm doing all of this, and slowly, what comes first is 3 parts. Every story is really basically done in 3 parts: beginning, middle, and end. First act, second act, third act. Always the weakest part of any project is the second act. That's the killer. That's the one where it goes, doomph. So slowly a structure forms, and when I think I've got it right, I then start writing a detailed treatment based on those cards. And they're very detailed, which is not the norm in Hollywood. Most people either don't do a treatment or they just do a couple of pages. I have written some as long as 52 pages. And when you consider that the final script was only probably 110 pages, that's a very detailed treatment. But what it does is it gives me a roadmap so I don't get lost. And so when I wake up in the morning, after maybe too many pisco punches, which I just had my first pisco punch at lunch, and I realized why it's called a pisco punch. It packs a punch. I thought, oh, this is a nice girl's drink, you know, sip, 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 and suddenly, oh, my eyes feel a little funny. I stopped drinking, by the way. I didn't finish it. So you wake up in the morning, not terribly inspired, and instead of having to sit there in front of a computer screen or a blank piece of paper for hours saying, I don't know where I'm going on this, you do know where you're going because you figured it out. So that's the way I work. Except I did not do that with the King's Speech, which is my most successful piece so far. I'm not quite sure why I didn't. I did the 3x5 cards. I did those. And I did use them in the writing process, but I never mapped out a treatment. Sorry, I misspeak here. I did arrange the cards in some kind of an order, but I did not write a treatment. I just wrote. And happily, the magic took place that sometimes does happen. When you're no longer a writer, you're a stenographer, and you're taking dictation from your characters. They come alive, they're in the room with you, and they talk to you. I know that sounds very Southern California woo-woo, but it's true. It really does. Bertie did live with me for several months, and we got along just beautifully. And I was taking dictation. He would say, no, what you just wrote, that's not what I would say. I'd say it this way. Logue would do the same thing. The only other time this has happened just recently. I've just 2 days ago, really, before getting on the plane, finished the first draft of a movie about Miles Davis, the great musician and trumpet player and jazz composer, for Denzel Washington to direct, not to play Miles, but to direct. And there, I fully intended to do my old process, but I kept on moving around. I had to go to Portugal to do a mentoring thing at a gathering of young filmmakers, which I thought you would be. But I was there for 10 days. I then had to go to Ireland to work on something else. So I never got that corkboard there. And as a result, I didn't have the treatment. It's the hardest project I've ever worked on in my life. It took me 6 months when it should have taken me 2 months. And it was really a devil because I hadn't done it. But amazingly enough, I think it's the best thing I've written since the King's Speech. So I can say with a bit of embarrassment that the 2 best things I've written, I didn't use my normal technique, which may be teaching me something, that I need to be freer. I could go on more and more about the way I write, how you deal with notes from the studio, but I don't think that that's what you've come to hear. I think you want to know other things, and I think possibly it would be best if we started the Q&A. And if it all runs dry and you've got no questions to answer, I'll just keep pontificating until you all go home. So can we start the questioning?
Yeah, so sure. So does anyone have any questions? Just raise your hand and we'll get to you with a microphone. Is there anything that you were thinking about and that you're curious to know?
Firstly, good afternoon, Mr. David. It must feel very special that a story so personal for you has reached millions of people. Do you believe the main message relates with what is happening in the world today?
Sorry.
So the King's speech was a very personal kind of story for you. You could obviously relate to the story. So do you think that the main message of the King's speech relates with what is happening today? How can we relate to it?
You know, absolutely. I think you could take that same story and put it present day. You could have the Emperor of Japan who stutters and he has to be helped by a Korean speech therapist. I mean, there are all sorts of, sorry, that was a joke, a bad joke, but I did suggest that to the Japanese producers when they did the play in Japanese and they didn't think it was funny at all. Yeah, it is, I believe, still pertinent today. It is about several things that are incredibly important today. Duty, sense of duty. Bertie, now I can really see you, this is great. Bertie was a man who understood duty, which his brother did not. He understood that for privilege comes responsibility. Responsibility to the state that gave him the privilege of being a royal prince and then a king. It's about friendship. Particularly in this case, male friendship. And that's something that I regret that we seem to have lost more and more in our society. And I'm not talking about sexual male friendship, I'm talking about matesmanship, bonding. You know, the earliest surviving piece of literature, Gilgamesh, is basically about two bros. You know, two guys, and it's the kind of friendship of going right back to early times. If you're in battle and you trip and fall, you need a friend you know is not going to run, but is going to stand with his spear and defend you until you get on your feet. Or when the animal charges, he's not going to say, "Oh, here comes the lion, I'm out of here." He's going to risk his life to save you. It's that kind of male friendship. And this is what poor Bertie was lacking so incredibly in his life, and what Logue provided. And so that's something which is timeless. And then there's, of course, the matter of being a stutterer, which is a very personal story to me because I was a very bad stutterer. And if you ever get reincarnated, please choose not to come back as a stuttering child. It's not much fun. Avoid it at all costs. It's very tough. And if I have in any way helped my fellow stutterers, which apparently I have from the letters and messages I get, that to me was a greater reward than getting the Oscar. So, more questions. Come on, guys. Girls, lots of girls here.
Good afternoon, Mr. David. My question is, which are your favorite writers?
Which are your favourite writers?
Oh, my favorite writers. Ooh. I am very, very fond of an English writer who is no longer read very much. His name is Ford Mattocks Ford, a novelist of the early 20th century, also a literary critic, editor of literary magazines. He published early works of Hemingway, Scott Fitzgerald. He discovered a lot of writers. but he was also a magnificent master of the English language. And I urge you, when you are proficient enough, to take a look at it's a quartet of novels called Parade's End, and it has some of the finest use of the English language you'll ever read. I'm also very fond of something that you've probably read, but in children's book form. Kenneth Grahame, who is the author of Wind in the Willows. And if you read the original version, his version of when he wrote it, it is a masterpiece of the English language. There's particularly a chapter called Pipes at the Gate of Pan, which is some of the most beautiful writing in the English language, and I really recommend that to you. Of course, I love Hemingway, loved him very much as a young man, I still do, even though he's been copied and parodied so many times. A lot of people don't take him seriously anymore, but he was a master of clean use of the English language. It's so direct and so succinct. So those are a few. And of course, there's Willie Shakespeare. Who can forget Willie? Anybody next?
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, there's.
Good afternoon. My question is, have you tried to read some Peruvian books?
Well, I can't. I can't read them in Peruvian, obviously, and I do apologize. So, what I would appreciate is if you have some recommendations that have been translated. I would really love to know that, and I'll take a crack at it.
I can recommend you some books for example.
If you write them down for me and give them to me afterwards,
I would love that.
thank you very much. No, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe my next movie will come out of. Really.
Good afternoon. My question is, what are your favorite? No, what are your better achievement? Your best achievement.
Best achievement. What
Yes.
what would David consider his best achievement?
What consider is his
Well,
best
having two
achievement?
beautiful children. I'm serious. Having two beautiful children who I love still, which is an achievement. This is an achievement today to have that. Falling in love again, even at my age. And I guess being able, not always easily, but being able to earn my living doing something that I love. And that's something I really hope that you can all find, because if you can feed and house yourself by doing something that you love, you have won the game of life right there. You're a winner. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. David. Well, I wanted to question you about the King's speech. Well, I haven't done my research because I was working, but I've read a little bit, and I've read that it's about a king that has a disability, something like that. And I don't know if this book, it could be like a motivation for people with disability. Maybe it could be like a sort of this kind of books also. I don't know if this is the path of this book, or is in another way, or it's like a little bit, or it could be maybe in the future. Maybe it could be it'd be better. It'd be good for these people.
Yeah.
I don't know. it'd be good because there are a lot of people with disabilities now,
Yeah.
and I think for a king not doing his things that he had to do, it'd be really hard.
Because
I
he
know.
had because he had a stammer. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
I know.
he had a stammer.
Yes, look, it is very much, first of all, I think you should go and see the play, right? Go see the play. But, yeah, it is very much a part of the King's Speech because ultimately what it is and what I had learned, it's not so much whether you can overcome your disability. It's wonderful if you can. I've been able to overcome mine to a large degree. I'm still a stutterer. You don't hear me stuttering, but it's happening all the time. But I know all the tricks of the trade. I know when to take a deep breath, when to relax. You know, I smooth it all out. But I'm still a stutterer. But I've overcome it as far as you're concerned. And that is a great achievement. And I'm so very, very profoundly grateful that I've been able to do this. But that's not really the point, and that's not how I did it. I did it by getting to a point of defiance, of anger. I was 16. Puberty had taken hold massively. I wanted to date girls, but how could I date girls? I couldn't ask them out on a date. And even if I had gotten a date with a girl, what was I going to do? I couldn't talk to them. And don't forget, I was in the 50s. This was in the 50s. And in the 50s, we dated differently than you do now. We actually talked to each other. And I also had been told and knew that if you don't conquer or control your stuttering by late adolescence, it's not impossible, but it really gets more and more difficult as you get older, which is one of the reasons why I think Bertie, the king, was so brave. He was doing this in his 30s and 40s, which is really hard to do. So I got a little depressed at first, but I'm not really a depressive personality. I'm a defiant personality, so I got angry. And I found myself jumping up and down on my bed, yelling the F word. And that's where that scene came from. For those of you who have seen the King's Speech, that's where that scene came from. I was jumping up and down saying, yeah, F you, F the gods. Why have I been punished with this? What did I do wrong? You know, I didn't sleep with my mother and kill my father like the Greek boys do. I'm referring to Oedipus Rex, by the way. I haven't done anything dreadful. Why did I get stuck with this? It's not fair. So, F you all, I'm going to live my life and I'm going to speak. And you're going to just have to listen to me. You're just going to have to listen because I won't shut up. And miraculously, within 2 weeks, the stuttering melted away. It was gone. And I was auditioning for the school play. I actually got a small role. It was George Bernard Shaw's Androcles and the Lion, and I played a Christian who gets eaten by a lion in the Colosseum, but I didn't stutter. So part of the message was, going back to your question, of there are many ways of handling disabilities, and not all of them is to make the disability disappear, but it's to make the disability not matter to you and your sense of self-worth. Yeah. Yes?
Hey, first, I'm sorry if I get nervous. Okay, my question is in two parts, okay? First, you live in that situation, I mean, in the Second World War. It's in that age, right? This
Yeah.
King's Speech. And why you wrote it? Why?
Why did I write it?
Yes.
Okay, I can answer that question very easily. I was a little boy when the war started, okay? One of my earliest memory, I was probably 2.5, was we were living on the coast of England, and I could hear these boom, boom sounds in the distance, and I asked my father, "What's that noise, Daddy?" And he lied to me. He said, "Oh, it's a storm over." And I knew there was no storm, there were no clouds in the sky. It was the guns of Dunkirk. And the war disrupted my life completely. On the boat to America, another boat in our convoy was sunk. It was terrifying times, and my stutter began. And it got very bad very quickly. And a bit later in the war, when I was old enough to understand certain things, my parents encouraged me to listen to the BBC shortwave and listen to the King's speeches. And they said, "David, listen to him. He was much worse than you, and he's not perfect yet, but he could give a wonderful speech and rally the world." And he became my idol. He became my little boy idol. I thought, oh, I want to be like him. And then as I got a bit older and realized I wanted to be a writer, I thought, I want to write something about Bertie one day. But I didn't know what. I didn't know what the story was. He was just a king who stuttered, as far as I knew. I then seriously started to think about it when I was at university. But term papers and final exams and co-eds got in the way, so not much got accomplished. I then did a bit of research reading the official biography of Bertie and learned nothing. It was very dry. So nothing happened there. And then when I wrote, my first movie was Tucker, the Man in His Dream, with directed by Francis Coppola, with Jeff Bridges. And I was naive and stupid enough to think that, oh, I've broken into Hollywood, I've written a film, now I can do anything I want, which of course was not true. But I thought it was true, and I thought, that king, I've got to get back to that king. And I started doing some more research, and every now and again, I would catch a little blip on the radar screen called Lionel Logue. Very little was written about him. Very little is written about him. But I thought, who was this? Yes, he helped the king. How? Who was he? What was he? I could get virtually no information. And I finally wrote to a friend in England to see if she could do some detective work for me. And she did. I think she just looked in the telephone directory. She looked under all the Logues, you see. And she discovered one of the sons was still alive, an elderly gentleman, a retired Harley Street specialist. If you've seen the movie, he's the young son who at the dinner table is always got his nose in books. He's reading textbooks, right? Well, that was the one. And I contacted him, and he was very gracious, and he said, yes, if you come to London, I'll be happy to talk with you and tell you what I remember of my father and his relationship with the king. And I have all of his notebooks that he took while treating the king, and I thought, that's it. That's the Dead Sea Scrolls right there. I've got everything I need. But he had one caveat. He said, I'll do all of this, but on one condition. You have to get the Queen Mother's permission. So this is when my American friends realized that I really am still at least half English, because an American writer would have said, the Queen Mother. But I wrote to the Queen Mother, and I waited patiently, and in due course I received a beautiful buff-colored envelope with a big wax seal on it, and it was dictated by her to her equerry, and she said, "Dear Mr. Seidler, please, not during my lifetime. The memory of those events are still too painful." And I thought, well, I can humor the old lady as an Englishman. She's very old. How long do I have to wait? A year, 18 months at the most. She's really old and doddering. Well, 30 years later, she had her last gin and tonic and died at 103. So that's how and why this all took place. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
Me. Hi. And sorry because I'm really, really nervous,
Yeah.
but it's fine. First of all, I just want to say,
Take your time, it's okay.
That's okay. Why don't you let somebody else answer a question, then we'll come back to you, okay? Yeah. All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. David. My question is, what kind of characteristics do you consider a person must have to become a good writer?
Ah,
Good question.
good question. Yes, that was in my other talk that I didn't give, and I probably should have, considering people are beginning to flee. By the way, if there's anything you really want to hear from me, now is the time to tell me to do it. Yes, one of the primary things you have to have is the courage to spend long hours by yourself in a room. That's not easy. You have to spend a lot of time all by yourself, and you learn more about yourself than you really want to know. Okay? If you can do that, you can be a writer. But if that really sends you screaming up the wall, don't do it. Don't. You're just going to be miserable. You're going to be very unhappy. You have to tolerate loneliness. And you have to love storytelling, and you have to love humanity. You must love your characters. I saw some hands. We'll come back to you. You tell me when you're ready. Okay?
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. David. I would like to know if you had faced something difficult, because every person has something difficult to face in life. From the movie, it was because the king. In your case, did you have something difficult to face?
Sorry, I didn't hear it clearly.
Obviously in the story, the king's speech, the king had his stammer, his stutter, and you yourself had your stutter. Was there anything else in your life? Has there been anything else that has been difficult, that you've had to face some particular challenge?
Oh, yes.
I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Well, I'll just give you one sample of what was going on in my life when I wrote the King's Speech. My career was at an utter standstill, right? Reality television had taken over in America. All my bread and butter money had dried up. I was in a financial bind. I was diagnosed with a very serious type of cancer that at the diagnosis, they only gave me a 20% chance of surviving. That was 10 years ago, and I'm fine now, thank you. But at the time, it didn't look very good. And my wife of 30 years left me. All right? So yes, there were things to overcome. But that's when you have to be hard. You just have to be hard, and you have to do it. It's a test, and I think it's a test that it's like Damascus steel, right? Damascus steel gets heated, beaten, plunged into cold water, heated, beaten again, and it comes out as the toughest sword that is made. So that's what happens to you. Thank you. Yeah, you ready? Yes? Good.
Yeah, another question? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we must come back to this brave young lady here.
Yeah,
Sure,
do you want to
sure.
go first,
Sure.
and then we can come over here?
Mr. Davis, I'm glad to talk to you finally. Have you ever tried to write about blind people?
Have I ever
if
tried?
If not, it could be called The Blind King.
No, I never have. That's never come my way, but I certainly would not be afraid to do so. I would not shy away from that. It's just no story has ever come my way involving a blind person that I thought, I must tell that story. But if it did, I would embrace it fully. That's my brave friend here.
Thank you so much, and sorry for that. Well,
Don't worry.
I don't know. I just want to thank you. I just want to say to you, thank you so much for wrote the King speech, because this can show to the others how is live with is
A stammer, a stutter?
Yeah, because I have a stammer, and I know how difficult is this with the friends, the university, and all of that. And I remember when I saw the film, I cried a lot and for a week or something like that. But it was really good. I mean, in a good way, because all the world see this movie, and it's a good opportunity to show the others all the challenges and all the things that we have to live, because live with a stutter is not easy. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
You know, it's moments like these that are the real reward. Much, much better than winning an Oscar. Thank you so much. And you're a very, very brave young woman. You'll be fine. I know you'll be fine.
My question is, what is your opinion about corruption people?
About?
What is your opinion about the corruption?
Corruption, corrupt people.
Corrupt
Yeah?
people, yes.
Corrupt people.
Are you talking about the President of the United States?
There's a big corruption problem in Peru.
Well, what can I say to that? I mean, they have to live with themselves. Unfortunately, we have to live with what they do to us in our society. But I think that they pay a terrible price for what they're doing. I'm not a religious man in the conventional sense. I don't necessarily believe in heaven and hell, but I do believe in heaven and hell on earth. And they find their way to hell, and they burn. And it's incumbent upon us to fight their corruption, even at a price. And there is a price, because in their corruption they acquire great power. And so they can hurt the people who fight against them. But that's what we're here for. I mean, what are we here for? Are we here just to live simple, peaceful, pleasant lives and watch TV and eat popcorn? I think there's more to life. It's all right. It's okay.
Okay, I had one solution about that. No, I have one solution about corruption, but all the people don't like it. Maybe I believe it's important that the religious to be religious, because in my case, in my family, there are corruption. My father is a politician, but he stay in a group who is corrupt. Political corruption, I don't know. Yes, I pray a lot. For me, in the time, he's changed that. Some character, no, some behaviors. Yes.
What was the question?
Just in her family, she's had to face that, so she was wondering your opinion of corruption in general.
Well, I gave you my opinion, and I hope it made some sense. You know, I work in a very corrupt business. I too have been raped by Harvey Weinstein. You know, the King's Speech, he was not the producer, by the way, but he was the distributor, and yes, he cheated me, and I didn't get the money I should have gotten for that film. And I have subsequently had at least 2 occasions where I have not been paid for work I've done. That's a form of corruption. And you can either decide to play along with it and accept it, or you can fight it. And I personally, I'm a fighter.
Okay, last question. Sorry to ask again. It's because I'm very curious about this question. Which director were you more comfortable to work with? Because I think that doing a movie is teamwork. So is there any director you want to work with? Is there some favorite one? I don't know.
I'm not that brave, you know. No, Tom Hooper, who has a reputation of being a very, very difficult man, and he is a very difficult man, but the actual working relationship with him was very, very, very good. I'll tell you why. Most directors will, when you get to the final script and then they're working on it for the shooting script, they'll say, what if your character does this, this, and this? I want, try that. And you say, no, this is wrong, this is so wrong. But you're forced to, because if you don't do it, you're off the movie, and they'll hire somebody else who will do everything the director says. So with good faith, you try your best to make this idiotic idea work. And because it was the director's idea, he doesn't see it as being idiotic, and it goes into the movie, and slowly your script gets ruined. With Tom, he did a lot of what ifs, but there was a difference with Tom. When he would see what I had done in good faith, trying the best I could, sometimes he'd say, yeah, I like it, let's keep it, and it didn't hurt the movie, it didn't help it, but it didn't hurt it, so I was all right with it. But often, more times than not, he would say, you know, David, you were right. We're going to go back to your original way of doing it, it was better. So I realized that although he was a man with a very large ego, that ego was in the service of making the film the best he could make it, and not in just self-aggrandizement, if you know what I mean. So that, I felt, was truly the collaborative spirit that everybody in Hollywood talks about movies being a collaborative effort, and it's not. It's usually a dictatorial effort, right? But with him, it was collaborative. Now, once the movie was made, he was really a difficult guy, and we're no longer very friendly with each other, but I did enjoy working with him. I think I'm going to enjoy working with Denzel Washington. At our first meeting at a sushi restaurant, and that man can really eat sushi, he was there with the producer on the film, also a black man from the Caribbean, and we were getting along really quite well. And then I said something that it was dangerous, but I had to say it because it did really concern me and worry me about whether I was actually suited to do this film. I wanted to write it. I was fascinated by Miles Davis, and I wanted to do but I said, look, guys, maybe you haven't noticed, but I'm not black. And Denzel didn't bat an eyelash. He looked at me and he said, don't worry about it, I am. And I knew we could work together. Okay? Because he did understand my fears. My fear that could I bridge this huge gap of being a very white man. I mean, even my hair is white. Could I get into the soul of not just a black man, but a very complex, difficult, genius black man? And could I, with my English, write in the syntax and rhythm of a black jazz musician? And he had faith that I could, and that if I made some mistakes, he would correct them for me. So I felt liberated. And as a result, I've written at least a first draft that the producer has read it, and he says, you nailed it, you got it, it's fine. So I think he's going to be great to work with.
Good afternoon, Mr. David Seidler. I have a question about, really I have a lot of questions, but I would like just to make only one. You have told us about your difficulties at school, stuttering problems. How would you advise young people who now are studying universities and schools to stop the bullying at school and this kind of problems like stuttering? Because stuttering is not only the only problem. We have more problems at school. How would you advise them to stop it? Thanks.
Well, I think there are two things. One is those who are being bullied must not submit. You don't surrender. Yes, I was bullied as a stutterer, but I ran for senior class council, all right, in my high school. And the rules of the school were anybody running for a school office had to give a speech to the assembled school auditorium. You couldn't run and not give that speech. So I had to get up and give this speech to the full school. And you had like 3 minutes to give a speech. Well, it took me 3 minutes to get the one sentence out that I needed to get out. I said, very painfully, vote for me, because if I say anything in school council, it is so painful and so difficult, I will have thought it through very carefully, all right? And I would like to say that I then got elected, but I did not get elected. But I got a degree of respect for having stood up to the system, if you can. But I think the biggest part of my answer is to the rest of you who are not being bullied, but who stand by idly and let it happen. It really is incumbent upon all of us to step in. And when you see the bullying happen, I know you can get beaten up by the bullies. It does happen. You can get a punch in the nose, but you've got to say, no, this is not acceptable. I will not tolerate this. I will not watch this happen.
Thank you. We have a question from our Instagram users,
Okay.
if that's all right. I'll just go ahead. So there was a question, did you add some kind of behavior to the main character in the king's speech? So to the king, did you add anything extra from any special person, or was it completely, I mean, did you try to make it completely faithful to who the king was?
Yes, I did. I did not add it. I was faithful. After all, I was writing about a fairly recently deceased British king, and I knew I would be crucified by the British critics if I took liberties. And so did the producers, and before the script went into production, they gave it to a panel of 3 of the top British historians. And everybody held their breath, waiting for them to say, oh, he got this terribly wrong. No, 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 no. But no, they came back and they said, except for a couple of very minor things of giving somebody the wrong title, Seidler got it really right. I researched it fully. The only liberty I took in the entire film didn't have to do with the king. It had to do with Lionel Logue, and it actually didn't have to do with Lionel. It had to do with his wife. Nothing was written at that time about the wife, Myrtle. And so I thought, well, there's got to be drama in his story too. And drama is based on 2 people wanting something different. Because if they all want the same thing, there's no drama. So I created a Myrtle who was desperately homesick for Australia, wanted to go home to Mother Australia. She hated being in England, where she was treated badly for being Australian, and she was just miserable, and that was their conflict, all right? Right at the last minute, a grandson of Logue called the production house and said, oh, by the way, I've got the journals. I've got the missing journals. And I thought, oh, God, no. I wanted them when I started the project, but now I've written it. What happens if I got it all wrong? The whole thing is going to unravel. Happily, I got it all right, except for one thing. Myrtle was not unhappy in England. She loved being in England. She thought it was absolutely jammy that her husband was treating the king. And she was an avid bridge player, and her standard bridge partner was George Bernard Shaw. So I got that one really wrong, but I got it right in a certain sense, because if I had written her like that, there would have been no drama and conflict in that family. That's the only liberty I took.
Good afternoon, Mr. David. I have a question for you. I want to know, how did you feel when you received the notice that you were invited by Británico to come here to Peru?
Oh, well, that's really an easy answer, because it didn't come as a surprise. When the producer, Carlos, he was in London in 2012 when we did the play on the West End. And he knew the producer there, and he was introduced to me, and he said then, I really would like to do this in Peru. Would you permit it? And I thought for maybe 2 seconds and said, absolutely, you have permission, but there's one thing I insist. I have to be here for the premiere. I want to come to Peru. And your next question would be, why did you want to come to Peru? So I'll answer that for you. I am fascinated how the culture of different nations affect the written word. The The play has been translated into 8 languages so far, and there are about 12 countries that have had productions. I've seen a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them. And I'm fascinated how in each case it changes the play slightly. There was a production in Finland, and it was very Nordic. Everybody was kind of a Viking. It was wonderfully done, but it was not quite the way I wrote it. I saw a production in Vienna, and miraculously Lionel Logue resembled Sigmund Freud. I saw a production in Italy, actually 2, one in Milano, one in Rome, and in both of them, in the final speech, the king's speech, he became El Duce, you know. So I have always been fascinated by Peruvian culture because it's such an interesting mix. It's the coming together of a Inca civilization with a Spanish civilization and melding sometimes with tough times for the Incas, but nonetheless, you have produced a culture that is a blend of this. And so you are a very unique people. And I wanted to see what you would bring to the play, and I will know tomorrow night.
I have a question now. So did you feel intimidated writing about nobility, about the royal family, when you, you wanted to write about this story, you wanted to write about the king for a long time, but did you feel intimidated writing about the royal family? I know you mentioned you had to contact the Queen's mother, so that might have been a bit intimidating. And then obviously you had to do a lot of research. Was that hard?
I didn't feel intimidated so much writing it. I felt intimidated when I'd finished and realized it was going to go out into the world, and that scared me. It really did, because I thought, the British can be brutal. British critics can be really tough, and I thought, they're going to absolutely hang me, particularly even though I am born in England and sort of I still carry a British passport as well as an American one. I'm basically a Hollywood writer, and they're going to just murder me. So, yes, I was concerned. I was much more concerned about writing about Miles Davis, quite frankly. That intimidated me. You know, how dare I, as a, basically a very middle-class white guy, take on someone like Miles Davis? But thank goodness I seem to have pulled it off.
Thank you.
2 more.
Hi.
2 more questions? Yes.
Good evening. First, this is the first time I'm holding a microphone. I'm a stammer too, and this is such a, I don't know, I think it's awesome. Here's to the girl. Everything is gonna be okay, trust me. I've went through therapy for 5 years, I think so. And trust me, like holding this microphone in front of, I don't know, 100 people, it's a big achievement for me. Well, this is a random question, I reckon. What do you think about the lost generation and young Steinbeck?
Sorry, say that again. The Lost Generation.
The Lost Generation and young Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck.
John Steinbeck, The Lost Generation.
Yes. Sorry.
Oh, I don't know that work of his.
He wrote Of Mice and Men.
Yeah. No, I know he's other
he's
stuff.
cool.
But I don't know the Lost Generation. Oh, you mean, what do I think of the Lost Generation? As a group of writers.
Yeah.
The group of writers.
Okay. By the way, just go back to your first thing. When I said, you're going to be all right, trust me, what I was talking about was not necessarily that the stutter will disappear and go away forever, but she will be all right as a person because she has the bravery to confront it, just as you have the bravery to pick up a microphone for the first time. Okay. Yeah, I mean, Scott Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Ernest Hemingway, Dos Passos. These are all men that I read avidly as a student, as a young man. They affected my writing. What I love about them is that they wrote not just for money, although obviously they wanted to get paid, not just for fame, but they were trying to change the world at least a little bit. And that to me is something that may be lacking today. Again, I go back to, what are we here for? What are we here for? I think we're here to love, to participate in love. And I don't mean just for a member of the opposite or even the same sex. I don't mean orgia. I mean loving another individual. That's a wonderful thing. But I mean love of humanity, so we can say, ask not what this planet can do for you, ask what you can do for this planet. Because I fear that we are really killing ourselves. And we need to embrace a universal love to reverse this process before it's too late.
One more question? Yep.
First of all, good afternoon. My question is if I was wondering if it was easy to find or to choose your career.
Was it easy to choose my career? Well, I was one of these spoiled middle-class children who went off to university and thought that was marvelous, that was great fun. And when I was about to graduate, you mean I've got to earn a living now? Nobody really told me I had to earn a living, and how am I going to earn a living? I had no idea what I was going to do, so I did the obvious. I went on to graduate school to delay the decision. But I then realized that it had to be in the creative field. I originally went off to Cornell University to be a botanist. I wanted to help feed the world by producing better crops. And although I did rather well at it, I also started writing really bad poetry. I mean, terrible poetry. But I had an English teacher who was irresponsible enough to praise me and say, young man, you know, you could write. So I made this incredibly rash decision to become a writer without any means of supporting myself in doing it. And I just had to struggle through it. I had to do a lot of things that I didn't enjoy doing, like working in advertising, which I really hated. At one point, I was employed painting red and white candy stripes on hamburger stands. Okay? I've been a political advisor to the Prime Minister of Fiji, which is another very long story, which I won't tell today. But yeah, it's been a struggle. I really wasn't able to earn enough money to live on with my writing until I was in my early 40s. So it was my course. It was what I had to do. And that's what I mean when I say, as students, as young people, give it a lot of thought. What do you want? What do you ultimately want out of your life? When you get to be an old fart like me, and you look back down at your life, are you pleased with what you've done? Do you think that you used your time well? And I can say that at this stage, yeah, I made some incredible mistakes, and I wasted many years doing things I shouldn't be doing. But ultimately, yes, I'm pleased with my life. I think I've lived it well.
One more question? Yeah, final question. Okay.
Thank you. This is from Britannico Live. We are in the fan page in live video. So one person asked if you could be inspired to write a story about Peruvian culture.
Well, you see, now this is kind of good, because this is important that you understand. You say, can you write a story about Peruvian culture? Well, yeah, that sounds really interesting, but where's the story? It's always got to be, what is the story? Would I like to write something about Peruvian culture? Yes. I would have loved to have written Aguirre, Wrath of God. Have you seen that movie, the Werner Herzog movie, about one of the conquistadors lost in Peru? Magnificent movie, magnificent movie. So it's always a question of, what is the story? You come to me with a riveting story about Peru, I'll write it. Or maybe I should not be lazy and I should do my research and find a riveting story about Peru. And maybe I'll do that, because I'd love to come back here and work. It'd be great.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, everyone, I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's been fantastic. You've had really great questions. Obviously, thank you very much, David, for your time, for such thoughtful answers. It's been a really good afternoon. I just want to remind everybody of the play. The King's Speech begins tomorrow from the 22nd of September in the Teatro Británico in Miraflores. And it runs until December the 17th. It's on every night from Wednesday to Monday at 8 p.m. And as a Británico student, your ticket is only 15 soles. So you have a really great discount if you're a Británico student, and you can buy 2 tickets for 15 soles.
And I need your $5, please.
Yeah. It's a great play, so we really hope that you can join us. We hope that you can go and see the play. No excuses. You have until December. And well, thank you once again. Thank you to David, and thank you to our Británico Live viewers as well. Okay, thank you everyone.